You probably clicked into this video because I used some kind of clickbaity type title that said something like, "This artwork sucks," and you, like any other human being, wanted to come and see what kind of train wreck this art piece was going to be. And while it is true I was not 100% happy with the final piece, and honestly, I don't really like the final piece in here, I did think that what I did here and the lessons that I learned for myself were valuable for me and could be valuable for you guys. So I thought I would share it with you anyway, even though I am not super happy with the final result. Before we get to the lesson that I learned, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I am trying to accomplish with this piece. There's a couple of things that I'm doing here that are very new to me, things that I haven't really done before. Number one, I am painting with inks, and I don't really use inks that often. I have a bunch of them and I've not used them very much. So when I was looking for something to do, I remembered that I had all these inks that I haven't really used very much, and I thought it would be really fun to play with these and just kind of see what kinds of things I could make. So I did a little bit of kind of looking online to see what kinds of things other people had made to kind of get some ideas, and I saw some really cool pieces where people had used either inks or watercolors and made this really nice kind of landscape with this kind of misty, mysterious background where the trees in the background were kind of just kind of barely there. It's kind of like the abstract landscape type of thing, and I thought that would be really fun and would work really well with inks. The other new thing that I'm doing, and new for me, is I'm going to be working in more of a monochromatic style. And typically I don't work in a monochromatic style. I typically just kind of use whichever colors I think need to be used. But I am trying to experiment a little bit more with my artwork to try and figure out what kinds of styles I like, what kinds of things I want to incorporate more in my art, and I figured there's no better way to do that than to actually try it out and see if it's something that I enjoyed or not, and see if the result is something that I liked or not. And of course, I'm using purple because purple is one of my favorite colors, and I honestly don't use it a whole lot in my artwork. So I thought it would be a good idea to pick a color that I thought I would enjoy looking at in kind of a monochromatic painting. And so here we are. I'm using some watercolor paper that I honestly am not really sure where I got. I don't know a brand name or anything like that, so I'm sure it is not 100% cotton. It is likely from Let's Make Art. It was just some loose watercolor paper that I had lying around, and it seems to be working okay. It definitely warps quite a bit with this really heavy wet on wet technique that I'm using here, and I am definitely getting some of the effects that I was hoping for with this. You can kind of see that the treescape here in the background is definitely very abstract. It's very blurry, that sort of thing, which is kind of what I was going for here. And later on I will go in and build up some additional layers to try and give it a little bit more interest. So now on to some of the mistakes that I made in this piece. I should have definitely kind of ran the water up a little bit higher to get some of that background area seeping up a little higher, but all in all it ends up turning out okay because I ended up going over that again later. But in between where I was working on the bottom area and this top area, I used the heat gun on there, and I used it over top of where some of the masking fluid was already put down, and I just think that that ended up really kind of messing things up and making the masking fluid adhere a little bit too hard to the paper. So when I go to pull the masking fluid up off from the moon, we end up with a giant mess. It ended up grabbing onto the paper and ripping the paper up really badly. Strangely, I didn't have the same issue down in the water. The masking fluid on the water came up really nicely and cleanly, but the moon not so much. At this point, I realize that there's not enough contrast in here, so I'm going in to put in a little bit darker inks down at the coastline here, and to put in some more kind of solid shapes so that you can kind of see some of the trees and stuff that are a little bit closer to you. So I'm just trying to make sure to vary the height of these and the shapes and that sort of thing so that it doesn't look quite so uniform all the way across, and this ends up turning out pretty well. But I end up definitely going in and reworking some of this area because, as you can see here, it's a very small area where I've got these defined trees and I've got this big moon in the water, and so there's not really a point of interest. There's not a focal point in this piece at the moment, and that ends up kind of being an issue later on that I go back and do some more work to try and fix. As I mentioned earlier, the paper got all torn up terribly when I pulled up the masking fluid on the moon, so I decided to try something different. I thought, well, maybe if I paint the moon purples, it will kind of hide the issue with the paper, because it would have a lot of texture in there, and it was meant to be a moon anyway, so the texture would kind of hide the issues with the paper. So I'm just going for it just to see what happens here. In the end, I end up not liking it, but this was worth a try anyway. So at this point, I am really not happy with this piece, and the moon is just really sticking out like a sore thumb instead of being a focal point. It just doesn't really look like it belongs in this environment at all. And so I'm going through and putting in a little bit more of a purple tone over everything in order to kind of tie in the purple of the moon with everything else. And to a certain extent, I think that does work. And overall, I do like that I toned everything this more purple color, because I was hoping for this to be a little bit purpler of a piece, and it was kind of feeling a little grayer and maybe even a little more on the blue side than on the purple side. So I'm glad that I did this, but in the end, I don't like how the moon looks. So I decide to go ahead and cover it up. So at this point, my options were cover it up or throw it away. And I figured, well, you know what the heck, let's go ahead and cover it up and see what happens, because I've already put some time into this. Let's just see if there's anything that I can do to make this interesting, salvageable, to learn a lesson, whatever. So bleed-proof white comes out, and this is a pretty old bleed-proof white, and it was kind of thick and sticky, but it ended up, I was able to put it on here just fine, and it did end up covering up issues with the paper because it was pretty well torn up there, and you can see there's a spot there that kind of pulls down from the moon where the paper was torn, and I wasn't able to really kind of cover that up and make it kind of feel like it was part of the piece. But the bleed-proof white worked pretty well to kind of patch up any issues with the paper here, and then I was able to go on and do some more work to it to make it kind of fit in a little bit better with the piece in the end. And I think that's where the lesson comes in here is, you know, if you've got something that you feel like has gone off the rails or you ruined it, you might as well keep going and try some different things, because worst comes to worst, you ruin it more and you throw it away and whatever. But best case scenario, you end up with something you like, but most likely you'll end up having learned something about the material that you're working with, or things that you like or don't like, and so it's still a win in my book. I think that something that this is missing is kind of some point of interest. Right now it's just kind of a boring landscape, so it needs a little something here to make it more interesting. Maybe I can like throw some dragon silhouettes in the background or something, or one over the moon or something like that. I will come back down tomorrow and continue working on this with some fresh eyes, but I'm glad that it's not completely ruined. So thank goodness for the bleed-proof white. You can see that there's still like a little bit of texture in there, but I'm actually okay with that because it's the moon and the moon has texture. But it did seem to kind of fix a lot of the issues with the paper there. So glad I had it, glad I tried it. Otherwise I would have thrown this away and tried again, but I figured it was ruined anyway, I might as well try something else on it. Okay, we are back the next day, and as I mentioned before, I felt like this piece was lacking a little bit of interest. So I am wetting down all of kind of the top area here, and I'm avoiding the moon a little bit because I realized that as I was pushing water over top of the bleed proof white, it was actually reactivating, which surprised me a little bit because I didn't realize that that was water soluble in that way. So just something to know, if you are using bleed proof white, it may reactivate with water, or perhaps my bleed proof white is just really old and is reactivatable that way and shouldn't be. I'm not really sure, but it was definitely reactivating a little bit. So what I've decided to do here is I've decided that the background area there was just too short and was definitely kind of making everything just feel meh and boring. So I decided to kind of pull up the areas back there and make that kind of pop up into the sky a little bit higher. And I'm using a mixture of different purples. Some of them are more blue leaning and some of them are more purple leaning. And I'm just putting lots and lots of ink down to try and get some more of that kind of really interesting blurry background going on there, and keeping some nice darker inks down at the bottom, again, to kind of make it look like you can kind of see some of the foreground plants a little bit better. So I've let this dry mostly, and now I am putting in some more detailed plants here, just to kind of give it a little bit more interest in the foreground there. And I think this worked out really well because you've still got some of the kind of misty background, but then you can see a little bit of actual plants in the foreground. And I think it just kind of, like I said, gives it a little bit more interest. In a minute here, I'm going to work on the moon, and like I said earlier, the bleed proof white was reactivating with water, but I use that to my advantage, and I'm just using some inks and kind of making sure it gets a little bit wet to kind of tone down any color on there, and to make the moon kind of fit in with the piece a little bit more instead of being just this stark white orb. And putting some of the shadows and texture in the moon, I think, just makes it look a little bit better and work a little bit better with the piece overall. So while this piece didn't turn out the way I had originally imagined, and I am only moderately happy with it, I am glad that I went through the process of creating it, because I did learn a little bit more about the materials used in this. And next time I do a piece using inks, I should be able to be a little bit more effective and hopefully be able to get a result that is closer to what I'm wanting. This piece also re-taught me an important lesson in patience. So when I was working on this, for whatever reason, I was rushing through it a little bit more than I normally would, and I was using my heat gun on the inks in order to dry it, and I was using the heat gun over top of masked off areas with the masking fluid. And I knew that this could be a bad idea. I had heard from other artists that using a heat gun on masking fluid can cause it to attach to the paper more and rip up your paper when you remove it, but I had never actually experienced that. So I did use the heat gun on this, and it did rip up the paper. While I can't definitively say it was because of the heat gun on the masking fluid, I can say that I have used this masking fluid in the past and it has never done that. However, I also know that this masking fluid is a bit older, and it is possible that it was the age of the masking fluid and not the heat gun, or perhaps it was a combination of both. Either way, I shouldn't have risked it, and I should have just let the ink dry on its own instead of using the heat gun on it, and it would have saved me a lot of headache. All in all, I don't think this piece is a total failure. I think that there are some really interesting pieces in here. There's definitely things I like and things that I would do differently if I were to do it again. But let me just give you a nice look at the final result here, and let me know what you think of it. Let me know if you have any tips and tricks that I should do next time I'm working with inks in order to get better results. And also let me know what kinds of videos you like. I've been playing a little bit with my intros, and I think that they have been less than successful, but I'm just trying different things out just to see what works and see what I like, that sort of thing. So let me know if you like a little bit of talking head time at the beginning, or if you like it when I just jump right into the video, that sort of thing. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you again next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.